It's been said that all roads lead to London, and even at first glance you can see why. This truly is one of the world's most beautiful cities, and the millions of visitors that come here every year certainly seem to agree. There's something for everyone, from the style and grandeur of royal palaces right through to the thrills of the London Eye and a great deal more besides. But before we take a more detailed tour of the delights this great city has on offer, it's well worth stepping back in time for a whistle-stop guide to London's fascinating past and the events that have, quite literally, shaped its present and future. The first thing you'll notice when looking at any map of London is the dominant presence of the river that is often fondly referred to as Old Father Thames. Dividing London north and south, the River Thames was fundamental in attracting a scattering of ancient tribal settlers to this verdant valley. And when the Romans arrived in the 1st century AD, they quickly saw the advantage of occupying the district, fully exploiting the place they called Londinium as a port. After the Romans came the Vikings, and London grew at a rapid pace, evolving as the capital of Britannia. One of the earliest landmarks to appear was the first St. Paul's Cathedral in 604, followed by Westminster Abbey just after the turn of the first millennium, courtesy of the Saxon king Edward the Confessor. However, one of the best known and loved of all London sites was built after yet another invasion, this time by William the Conqueror in 1066. After winning the Battle of Hastings and proclaiming himself king, the ruler from Normandy had to prove to his new people that he meant business, and immediately commissioned the building of the Tower of London. Back in the 11th century, the original White Tower, at an imposing 30 metres tall, was the city's highest building, and must have been very impressive indeed. London continued to expand, and after the Plantagenets, Tudors, Stuarts, and even a Commonwealth for a brief spell, came one of the most significant events in the city's history. Although, if you look in the right places, you can still spot buildings from before 1666, they do tend to be exceptions rather than the rule, because this was the year of the Great Fire of London. By the 1700s, much of the rebuilding after the Great Fire had centred around the area we now know as the City, but further development quickly followed, especially with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Many of London's fine mansions stem from the prosperity of the 19th century's wealthy industrialists, while the East End of the city, by contrast, was packed with the working classes needed to make the factories profitable. As the 20th century became an age of innovation and the world went to war twice, London was once again set ablaze when in 1940 Adolf Hitler sent his Luftwaffe pilots nightly to bomb the city in the Blitz. In the post-World War II years, when Britain rebuilt London for a new generation that swung its way through the 60s, rocked through the 70s and partied through the 80s, before recovering through the 90s to start a new millennium, the cityscape changed beyond recognition as ancient and modern settled into a workable, if not always harmonious, coexistence. And on that occasionally discordant note, we've come right up to date in 21st century London. So where better to start our tour than at the place where almost every visitor to this city begins, and much of London's most dramatic recent history happens to have been made. We are of course talking about Buckingham Palace, the official residence of the British monarch, where the royal standard is only flown when the sovereign happens to be at home. During the summer months, when most of the visitors arrive, the royal family also tends to be on holiday at Balmoral in Scotland, and the state rooms at the palace are open to the public during August and September. However, for those who don't have the time or the budget for a palace tour, the changing of the guard is a very popular attraction, and it doesn't cost anything at all. This is one of the most beautiful areas of London at the top of the Mall and overlooking St James's Park, and in whichever direction you turn, the views are spectacular, and it's easy to appreciate why our more modern monarchs have elected to make Buckingham Palace their official London residence. Nevertheless, in this remarkable city's long and distinguished history, this isn't the most ancient of royal homes, having only really come into full service for Queen Victoria in 1837. The original building was constructed in 1703 for the Duke of Buckingham as a townhouse, but was acquired by King George III in 1762, with a view to replacing St James's Palace, which he disliked, describing it as a dust trap. Now, distant memories of the line of succession indicate that George III's main claim to fame was his madness, but it certainly wasn't evident in this property deal. For £28,000 sterling, he'd picked up a prime piece of real estate in a superb location, which was then surrounded by rolling green countryside. However, his subsequent illness did mean that his plans for a new palace sadly never came to fruition. What happened next is even more fascinating, especially as the old king's son, who ruled for some 9 years as Prince Regent while his father was ill, was responsible for inspiring much of what we know and love today as elegant Regency London. When he was crowned King George IV upon his father's death in 1820, he turned his attention to Buckingham Palace and commissioned John Nash, the most famous architect of the age, to design a new palace. The work took many years to complete, and the scandal-mongers of the time suggested that this was because George IV, renowned for his fondness for the ladies, was captivated by Nash's wife, and keeping her husband occupied may have been an ulterior motive. Whatever the truth of the matter, Buckingham Palace benefited greatly from John Nash's fine work. But the beautiful east front of Buckingham Palace, which is so familiar today, was actually remodelled many years later in Portland stone by Sir Aston Webb for King George V in 1913. The intention had been to build a sufficiently grand backdrop for the magnificent Victoria Memorial that had been created by Sir Thomas Brock back in 1911. And as you can see for yourself, the renovation was a triumph. As the 20th century progressed, and the Blitz of World War II took its toll, Buckingham Palace was a prime target for the Nazi bombers and was hit on no less than 7 occasions, the worst damage being the destruction of the Palace Chapel. With a fighting spirit, the King George VI and his wife Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, inspected the damage for all to see on the newsreels, sharing the camaraderie and support of their fellow Londoners, as together they refused to be intimidated by Adolf Hitler. In fact, when peace finally came with VE Day in May 1945, Buckingham Palace was at the heart of the entire nation's celebrations, as crowds of people gathered in the Mall to cheer the royal family and the Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, when they appeared on the palace balcony. It's a practice that's been repeated many times since for royal celebrations, and on a sadder note, for royal funerals, perhaps most memorably in more recent years to mark the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales, in 1997. It's no small wonder then that visitors to Buckingham Palace from all over the world come here to see this unique symbol of Britain's heritage and all the colour, splendour and pageantry that it represents. But it isn't only royal palaces that are bestowed with regal pomp and circumstance, and our next destination, although technically still a palace by name, certainly proves the point. After visiting Buckingham Palace, the Houses of Parliament, aka the Palace of Westminster, will be very high up on most people's list of London's top attractions. Here, the nation's system of government consists of 2 chambers, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The elected government, made up of members of Parliament, MPs, that represent constituencies from all around the country, sit in the Commons, while the Lords, sometimes known as the Second Chamber, scrutinise the actions of the elected government as part of the nation's law-making body. Much of the behaviour and many of the ceremonies in both houses will be strictly regulated by tradition, and a visit to the public galleries can be intriguing to say the least. There's been a Palace of Westminster on this site since King Edward the Confessor first built a royal residence here in the 11th century. But the Houses of Parliament that you see today has been rebuilt after a number of fires, but ironically not the Great Fire of 1666 that destroyed so much of London. The first fire to damage the Palace of Westminster was in 1512, but if Guy Fawkes had had his way, there would have been a second fire in 1605. His gunpowder plot to blow up King James I and everyone present at the state opening of Parliament was foiled when one of his accomplices turned whistleblower, and Guy Fawkes was captured, hung, drawn and quartered. Every year on November the 5th, the gruesome demise of Guy Fawkes is celebrated when effigies of him are burnt on bonfires all over Great Britain. Even so, of what you see today, only Westminster Hall, the crypt of St. Stephen's Chapel, the cloisters and the Jewel Tower are original, despite Guy Fawkes' failing to cause murder and mayhem. There was a second fire, but not until 1834, when a stove was overloaded with old wooden counting sticks that were once used by clerks in the Exchequer, and it set the whole building alight. The architect of the restoration was Sir Charles Barry, and although in 1941 a World War II bomb destroyed the chamber of the House of Commons, it was rebuilt to Barry's original specifications. Now, fascinating as this might all be, many of the visitors that come here do so because of one of the world's most famous clocks, fondly referred to by many as Big Ben. However, in point of fact, it's the huge bell high up in the clock tower that's Big Ben, chiming the hour day in, day out, keeping time for a grateful nation. This part of London is equally as incredible as the area around Buckingham Palace. And again, in whichever direction you turn, there are more national treasures just waiting to be discovered. The greatest of these is without doubt Westminster Abbey, having its foundations here as part of Edward the Confessor's grand design, which included a Benedictine abbey church in 1050 alongside his Palace of Westminster. As we already know from our brief history of London, 1066 was the next significant date for the city, with the arrival of William the Conqueror after the Battle of Hastings, and he certainly made his mark on the Abbey when he crowned himself king here on Christmas Day, since which time, with just two exceptions, the nation's kings and queens have all been crowned here. Visitors can also find the tombs of many legendary royals in the Abbey, including the Tudor queens, Mary I, her half-sister Elizabeth I, and their Stuart cousin Mary Queen of Scots, from one of Britain's most turbulent periods of history. Poets' Corner is another popular destination, where the great and the good of the arts are commemorated, including the Bard of Avon, William Shakespeare, and London's own social commentator, Charles Dickens. However, what makes Westminster Abbey so very special is the fact that this is still very much a church, with worshippers amongst the millions of visitors who come here to see the sights. After so much history, royal watching and ceremonial grandeur, an opportunity to sit quietly, take some time out and watch the world go by would be very welcome indeed. Today there's no better place to do this than Trafalgar Square, especially as so much of the area has now been pedestrianised. Once famous for the pigeons, the square is now pretty much a bird-free zone. And Lord Nelson, on top of his 165-foot high column, doesn't need to be cleaned quite so often. The reason for Nelson's presence and the square's name is because it commemorates the Battle of Trafalgar, when Napoleon and the French were beaten at sea by Lord Nelson, who was killed in the struggle aboard his flagship, the Victory. Interestingly, it was the architect John Nash, the man responsible for the transformation of Buckingham Palace for King George IV in the 1820s, who laid out this monument to national pride, which is as much appreciated in the 21st century as when it was first built. At the base of Nelson's column, be sure to look out for the lions on guard duty, 4 fine statues by Queen Victoria's favourite artist, Edward Landseer, that date back to the 1870s. And when you're rested and ready to resume your tour, there's plenty to see all around Trafalgar Square. The National Gallery is a wonderful neoclassical building, and as its name indicates, houses many of the nation's best loved and most precious art treasures. Even if fine art is not of any particular interest, the gallery is still worth visiting, if only for its sheer splendour. There are an incredible 2,300 paintings housed here, from the mid-13th century right through to 1900, and with such diverse painting styles as Leonardo da Vinci and Vincent van Gogh on display, everyone is guaranteed to find something to please them. And if the National Gallery whets your appetite for viewing paintings, the National Portrait Gallery is actually right next door, but is often missed by visitors as the entrance is just off Trafalgar Square in St Martin's Place. More than a gallery, this is a fascinating museum that charts the development of Britain through the portraits of the good, the bad, and on occasion ugly, who have shaped the nation's history. Some of the exhibits have caused their fair share of controversy, especially when the erstwhile sitters have been displeased with the artist's representation of their image. Nevertheless, returning to the National Gallery, ironically the building itself has proved to be the most controversial issue in more recent years, with the main culprit being the new Sainsbury wing, which was opened in 1991. With Buckingham Palace, the Houses of Parliament, Westminster Abbey, and Trafalgar Square having now been viewed, we've still got possibly the most historic and evocative of all London's world-famous landmarks to see. The Tower of London dominates the scene completely, and is, without doubt, one of the city's most popular attractions. However, this is one place where for most of its 900-year history, people really didn't want to visit, as the majority of those who went in, invariably under duress, never came out again. We already know that when construction began on the White Tower in 1078, on the orders of William the Conqueror, It was to symbolise his power, and this continued with the ever-expanding tower also being used as a royal palace. But it was during the reign of Henry VIII in the 16th century that the tower as a sinister prison became synonymous with torture, terror and untimely death. Even so, before Henry came to the throne, there were any number of prisoners who came to a sorry end here, including a Welsh prince, an English king, and the two young princes who disappeared from the tower in 1483, presumed murdered by their uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, who went on to be crowned King Richard III. In fact, the Bloody Tower was given its name because this is where the princes were allegedly killed, and it certainly has a very sinister atmosphere. Henry VIII is best known in the history books for having 6 wives, and as 2 of them, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, were beheaded here on his orders, the tower is very strongly associated with him. It comes as quite a surprise to most visitors that only 7 people, including Henry's 2 queens, were actually beheaded within the walls of the tower, but it was his favourite prison, and many of the 50,000 people who he condemned to death during his reign were sent from the tower to be executed outside, creating a ghoulish spectacle on occasion for thousands of onlookers. There's just so much history to absorb at the Tower of London. And with such well-known treasures as the Crown Jewels and the chilling Traitor's Gate, where prisoners entered the tower from the river, visitors can spend a whole day here and still not see everything. Nevertheless, despite the fascinating buildings, the ravens are an equally popular attraction, and they're definitely on a protected species list at the tower. Legend has it that if they ever leave the tower, the monarchy and the United Kingdom will fall, so it's not surprising they have their own Raven Master from the Yeoman Warders, better known to all who come here as Beefeaters, the ceremonial guardians of the tower. The Tower of London has a very prominent position along the River Thames, and of all the bridges that carry the people of London to and fro as they go about their business, the most spectacular, without any doubt whatsoever, has to be Tower Bridge. As commercial development increased during the 19th century, a further bridge was vital at this crossing point for access to the East End, but there was a major difficulty. A fixed bridge would prevent port traffic from flowing freely, so a construction was required that would open to allow shipping through. Upon completion in 1894, the bridge's lifting machinery was operated by steam, and the standard of engineering was so high that the practice continued right up to 1974, an incredible 80 years. In point of fact, the same winding mechanism is being used to this day, but powered by electricity, making life considerably easier for those charged with the raising and lowering of the bridge. The original steam engine is still on display though. And for anyone who doesn't mind climbing steps, There are 300 of them, and has a good head for heights. The catwalk joining the two towers is open to the public, and the beautiful views down the Thames are truly spectacular. So far, we've enjoyed a distinctly cultural view of London, but for a very different perspective, in every sense of the word, it's time to head south of the river in search of some fun. Back in the Dark Ages, when the first millennium was celebrated, people built great churches like Westminster Abbey to glorify God, having expected the turn of the 11th century to herald the end of the world. By the time the second millennium approached, there were still those who predicted doom and gloom, but there was nevertheless an overriding sense of celebration. And today, the London Eye, created to mark the monumentous occasion, epitomises the optimism and spirit of adventure that came with the dawning of a new age. Now as important an element of London's identity as Big Ben and Buckingham Palace, the London Eye has become a much-loved addition to the city skyline. And with an average of 10,000 visitors a day taking a flight on the Eye, it continues to be as thrilling as ever. Whether you view the Eye from the ground or travel in one of the capsules, the sheer scale of the project is immediately evident, and at a height of 135 metres, the world's tallest observation wheel is, even by 21st century standards, a miracle of modern engineering. However, to really appreciate what this fabulous attraction has to offer, you need to take to the skies. The views afforded by the surprisingly spacious and stable capsules are, quite literally, breathtaking, and during a half-hour flight, change constantly. Whatever the weather, the experience is always rewarding, while at night the London Eye takes on a whole new character. And having made the journey south of the river, there's plenty more to see before you return to the hustle and bustle of the city. It's impossible to visit the London Eye without wondering about the building that dominates the Bankside here. Known today as London County Hall, this was in fact for many years the headquarters of the Greater London Council, until its abolition in the late 1980s. Since this time, Londoners have been able to elect their own mayor, in similar fashion to their American counterparts, and the system appears to be working very well, although for a while this elegant Portland stone construction became surplus to requirements. The redundant GLC building has nonetheless been put to good use, housing the London Eye Visitors Centre, Dali Universe, a permanent exhibition of work of the surrealist Salvador Dali, the London Aquarium, 2 hotels, various restaurants, and a great deal more besides. And if you're looking for somewhere to get a really good view of the Thames and the Houses of Parliament, this is a superb vantage point, with a more relaxed atmosphere than many of the longer established tourist attractions. While we're on the subject of more unusual London locations that are a little bit off the more usual tourist trail, it's time to head for Baker Street, which is ironically where thousands of visitors arrive each day to find yet another of London's most frequented attractions. What brings people to Baker Street, or to be more precise, Marylebone Road, where it meets Baker Street, is a collection that made its first appearance here in 1835 and is still flourishing and growing to this day. This is Madame Tussauds, probably the most famous waxworks museum in the world, with likenesses of many famous people that date right back from the top celebrities of the present day to those of the 19th century. So, the most recognisable characteristic of the actual building is the huge dome, which became the London Planetarium after the Second World War, where audiences could enjoy an astronomy-based show recreating the stars at night. But a more unusual destination was promised here at Baker Street, and for a clue, look out for the statue, not made of wax, next to the eponymous underground station. It depicts none other than London's greatest detective, Sherlock Holmes, Baker Street's most famous resident. The statue by John Doubleday is as popular as any that are housed in Madame Tussauds, and wandering along Baker Street will bring you to 221B, where the detective and his sidekick Dr. Watson are reported to have lived between 1881 and 1904. However, there is a twist in this detective's tale, because despite public opinion being swayed to the contrary, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson actually belong to the realms of fiction rather than the history books. But the visitors who make their way to the Sherlock Holmes Museum are not known for letting the truth get in the way of a good story. The creator of Sherlock Holmes was Edinburgh-born doctor Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and when he first set up in practice, so few patients came to see his medical opinion, he started to write short stories to fill the time, and this is how the great detective came into being. The late 19th century reading public loved Sherlock Holmes, and he's still adored by readers to this day, not to mention the many stage and film adaptations, and this explains why so many enthusiasts seek out Baker Street and the Sherlock Holmes Museum, which promises to take visitors back in time to an age when villains quaked at the mere mention of this detective's name. London is world famous for its museums, and quite rightly so, even if the Sherlock Holmes Museum is a less well-known treasure. Generally speaking though, when people think of museums in London, the district they'll head for first will be South Kensington, where they truly are spoilt for choice. The age of the British Museum flourished in the 18th century when, for the upper classes at least, accessible travel opened up a whole new world, and the early souvenir collectors needed somewhere to display the artifacts they returned with. The British Museum in Bloomsbury is full of such eclectic treasures, including the controversial Elgin marbles, which some say were removed and others say were stolen by Lord Elgin from the Parthenon in Athens in the early 19th century. However, the later museums that continued the trend of putting artefacts on public display in South Kensington were created with very specific aims. The Victoria and Albert Museum was founded in 1852 as the Museum of Manufactures to inspire the design students of the day, and everything from ornate furniture to fashion can be found on display. The name of the museum was actually changed in 1899 by Queen Victoria in memory of her beloved husband Prince Albert, who died many years earlier at the age of 42. The Prince had always taken a great interest in the industrial development of Britain and had been the inspiration behind the Great Exhibition in the Crystal Palace of 1851. So this was a very appropriate way for Queen Victoria to honour her late husband. However, it has to be said that although packed with fascinating exhibits, the V&A, as it's fondly known, doesn't tend to be a must-see location on most children's wish list when they come to London. But the museum just a little further along the road most definitely is. This is the Natural History Museum, a vast cathedral-like building, which is in itself an architectural masterpiece. But what it houses, even for our technologically advanced 21st century children, is quite incredible. Visitors are greeted by a huge Diplodocus skeleton, one of the world's best loved dinosaurs. And from prehistory right through to modern-day life on Earth, there are any number of incredible exhibits to see. And as you might imagine, it isn't only the younger visitors that enjoy this museum. We can all experience again the wonderment of childhood, and it's never too late to discover the natural history of the ever-changing world in which we live. And even better news, the Science Museum is literally next door. So when you've experienced the splendour of nature, the achievements of the human race await, ranging from medicine to space travel, no more than a small step away. After so much information, there are plenty of open spaces close by where people can take a breather from so much enlightenment. And nearby Hyde Park and Kensington Gardens offer the perfect opportunity to enjoy a little light relief. On entering Kensington Gardens at the top of Exhibition Road, you'll find it hard to miss the extraordinary gold-gilded monument towering above the trees. As we already know, Queen Victoria did much to honour the name of her late husband, Prince Albert, and this, the Prince Albert Memorial, is no exception. The Queen commissioned this edifice while in deepest mourning for her beloved Albert. And if scale and grandeur indicate the depth of Victoria's sense of loss, then it'll come as no surprise that she never fully recovered from this terrible blow. The medieval-looking shrine boasts a Gothic revival spire adorned with angels, and beneath there sits a gilded bronze statue of the prince. A homage to Prince Albert's interest in arts, science and industry, a frieze with sculptures of celebrated artists, architects, poets and mathematicians envelopes the base of the pedestal with allegorical sculptures representing commerce, engineering, manufacture and agriculture at each corner, while beneath them on the platform elegant marble sculptures represent the 4 continents. And as we follow the lives and deaths of British royalty, we come to the site of more recent royal mourning. The gates at Kensington Palace have become iconic in more recent years, having been where the nation came together, united in expressing their grief after the tragic death of Diana, Princess of Wales, in 1997, when a sea of floral tributes appeared here. The palace was Diana's home and will forever be associated with her, like many London locations, including the exclusive department store Harrods, where she not only loved to shop, but is owned by Mohammed Al Fayed, the father of Dodi, who also died in the fatal Paris car crash that robbed the nation of the People's Princess. Heading east from the palace, we can find a touching tribute to the Princess of Wales, looking out over the Serpentine. The Princess of Wales Memorial Fountain was cleverly designed, using no less than 545 pieces of Cornish granite. And the flowing water with calm pools combined with the wonderful views across the river create a truly extraordinary atmosphere. Designed to reflect the princess's life and her fondly remembered qualities, the fountain is a place where visitors can reflect upon Diana and enjoy a little peace and tranquility far from the hustle and bustle of London's busy streets. The story of Diana, Princess of Wales, is inextricably linked with the London of the late 20th century, from her arrival as a young girl about town to her fairy tale wedding at our next destination, St Paul's Cathedral, which, as well as being a magnificent church, is also one of London's most visited tourist attractions. St Paul's lies at the heart of the London district known as the City, built on the site of the original Roman settlement. However, there are few remnants of ancient architecture here, because the Great Fire of London in 1666 started in the City district at a baker's shop in Pudding Lane, and the St Paul's Cathedral of that era was burnt to the ground. The city also suffered devastating fire damage during the Blitz in the Second World War, and the area is dominated today by banks and stylish modern office blocks. During the day, the streets are buzzing, but with few residential areas, there's little activity here at night. In fact, it really is only the churches that are a reminder of the past, with most of them having been restored to glory by the architect Sir Christopher Wren after the Great Fire. And he is, of course, most famous for rebuilding the St Paul's Cathedral that you see before you. The dome of St Paul's Cathedral is an intrinsic part of the London skyline, but the Great Fire wasn't the first inferno to rip through a place of worship on this site. There's been a church here since 604 AD, but the original structure was destroyed by fire in 1087. So it was therefore an already restored St Paul's that perished in the fire of 1666. In fact, this is generally reckoned to be the fifth St Paul's Cathedral, and if the Dean and Chapter of the 17th century had been given the final say, it would have been an altogether much less grand affair. Rather than rebuilding to the old design, Wren came up with a daring new design that met considerable resistance from the Conservative Church authorities, who insisted the plans were simplified. However, Wren was a determined character, and as the King, Charles II, had given him the authority to make ornamental changes to the approved design, Wren pushed his ideas through on this technicality, counting the huge dome and 2 towers as ornamental. The foundation stone was laid in 1675, but it was his son who placed the last stone high up on the lantern in 1708, completing the project on Wren's 76th birthday. For visitors to the cathedral today, the most popular spot has to be the Whispering Gallery, high up in the dome, where whispers, quite literally, do travel from side to side. And at the other end of the scale, deep down in the crypt, you'll find the tombs of many historic celebrities, including Lord Nelson, who, as we already know, is a very well-known figure around and about this great city. The Duke of Wellington, and even of Wren, the great architect himself. As our tour of London's best-loved landmarks draws to a close, we couldn't be in a better position to see an area of the city where modern design and ancient architecture sit so comfortably side by side. Directly opposite, across the river, is the Tate Modern, where since the year 2000, the national collection of modern art, dating from the 20th century onwards, has been housed. Often controversial, and always thought-provoking, the exhibits in the Tate Modern are guaranteed to be a talking point, as is the building in which they are housed. This once fully operational power station was designed by Sir Giles Gilbert Scott, the architect best known for creating Great Britain's iconic red telephone boxes, but by 1981 it was surplus to requirements. The Tate Gallery was founded way back in 1897 and named after Henry Tate, the famous millionaire and philanthropist who was half of the Tate and Lyle Sugar Company that's still thriving to this day. Once inside the Tate, be careful not to trip into the massive crack that crosses the expanse of concrete floor. Created by the Colombian sculptor Doris Salcedo, this extraordinary work symbolises the gulf between white Europeans and the rest of humanity and makes quite an impact. Over time, the Tate's various collections have been split into different sections, with the Tate Modern moved to renovated Bankside Gallery in 2000, and the Millennium Footbridge that will take you there from St Paul's across the river is definitely the most interesting way to arrive. For a while, this construction was nicknamed the Wobbly Bridge because pedestrians could feel it swaying, but it's now been modified, and it's fast becoming a very popular and stable addition to London's list of unique bridges that cross the River Thames. Next door to the Tate, you can find a new addition to the buildings gracing the river, inspired by one of the oldest and most famous of London's entertainment emporiums, the William Shakespeare Globe Theatre. First erected in 1599, the original Globe Theatre was built by Shakespeare and his acting troupe, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and provided the stage for many of the famous dramatist's greatest plays, among others Hamlet, Othello and King Lear. Completed in 1997, the theatre was recreated on the initiative of the American-born actor and director Sam Wanamaker, who, when searching for traces of the original theatre back in 1949, was very disappointed to find only a blackened plaque on a disused inn. The replica you see before you today boasts many beautiful features, such as the first thatched roof to be allowed in London since the Great Fire of 1666, as well as a stunning wrought iron gate adorned with a multitude of treasures featured in Shakespeare's plays. Looking at this amazing building today, it's quite enchanting to imagine what it must have been like to sit in the audience so many centuries ago and enjoy the first ever performance of a Shakespearean classic. Wherever you travel in London, the Thames is never far from you, and it truly has been key to the development of all the wonderful locations we've just experienced. But for anyone who comes here, there's a great deal more to London than sightseeing. The palaces, museums, galleries, gardens and churches are splendid indeed. However, the true character of the city and the pride of London's people can be felt wherever you go. At night, London comes alive to reveal a whole new side to its persona, and for theatre-goers, the choice on offer in the West End is without rival. There's everything available from musical extravaganza to serious drama, and when a new show opens in London, the world holds its breath to see how it'll be received. From Shaftesbury Avenue to Piccadilly, there are a whole host of theatres and shows on offer, but if you prefer a less expensive form of entertainment, you can always visit the nightly spectacle that is Covent Garden, where you'll see performances in the Central Market area that are often as captivating as those on the stage. But whatever show you choose, what better way could there be to end the evening than a meal in one of the city's many restaurants, where you'll find that London's richly deserved reputation for food is as good as anywhere in the world, especially if you can persuade someone else to foot the bill. From quiet cafes and busy restaurants to the unique area known as Chinatown and the lively atmosphere of Leicester Square, there's always somewhere to enjoy fine food, whether a quiet dinner for two or a night out with a group of friends. So, all in all, the pleasures of London and the truly amazing sights mean this is one city that really does deserve the title great. There's something here to enlighten and entertain everyone. And when you discover how London has evolved, surviving to rise phoenix-like from the ashes on so many occasions, you begin to appreciate why this is such a very special place. When the famous 18th century writer and philosopher Dr. Johnson said, "When a man is tired of London, he is tired of life," it was one of his more astute observations, especially as he went on to say, "For there is in London all that life can afford." As you've now seen for yourself, from Buckingham Palace to the Houses of Parliament, Trafalgar Square to the Tower, the London Eye to Madame Tussauds, the Victoria and Albert Museum to St. Paul's, and every other location, ancient or modern, too numerous to pack into this programme, London has so many unique treasures just waiting to be discovered. And what's more, as time goes by, proves again and again that when a city has heart, nothing will ever stop it from beating.